welcome. This week let us discuss about climate finance. So today we will talk about the various sources, instruments and flows as far as the climate finance is concerned. So to discuss that we will go through these concepts. So the concepts we are going to discuss are climate finance. We will have a definition with respect to how do we define the climate finance, what is the policy context and also the stakeholder perspective. We will also differentiate between or among the climate finance, green finance and sustainable finance. We will also discuss about the key actors and the stakeholders as far as climate finance is concerned, and we will also talk about the domestic and international sources of climate finance, major climate finance instruments including the green bonds, climate funds, carbon pricing and also the blended finance. We will also move on to discuss with respect to various markets as far as carbon is concerned and also various mechanisms as far as the carbon finance is done. Towards end, we will take up a case study as far as climate finance project is concerned and what is its impact in terms of a real world situation. So let us move on with respect to the definition. So climate finance refers to the flow of financial resources from public, private, domestic and international sources directed at activities that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which we talk as or we define or take it as mitigation, or help the communities and ecosystem to adapt to unavoidable impacts of the climate change that we discuss under adaptation. So that means we want to reduce the greenhouse gas emission as far as mitigation and adaptation is concerned through various flow of financial resources that is coming either from public or private or domestic or internal through various sources. So let us see the different stakeholders as far as the climate finance is concerned. So first with respect to the international kind of understanding and second is with respect to the domestic. So in international negotiations, climate finance refers to the international climate finance that flows from mostly from the developed countries to developing countries. So as far as international negotiation is concerned, it is the flow of fund from developed countries to the developing countries. And in contrast, as far as the domestic situation is concerned, different countries both developed and developing, they may refer to their expenditure or investments on climate action such as climate finance. So here in terms of domestic, it is both developed and developing, they refer their expenditure and invest under under climate finance. Now prior to 2015, that is the Paris Agreement. So prior to that, in terms of international climate finance, it was more focused on the public funding, but after the Paris Agreement, it also encompasses private and various alternate sources of funding. So that is the difference, because in the Paris Agreement, lot of emphasis has been given in terms of developing a funding mechanism so as to realize the goal of the climate finance or the climate adaptation and mitigation. Coming to in terms of domestic, several countries are also developing their own climate finance taxonomy. So in terms of domestic, various countries, we will also see the case of India. So as our own country, so several countries they are also developing their own mechanism. So in terms of the policy, Paris Agreement Article 2.1 C, it talks about making finance flow consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. So, that means as we can understand, climate finance is a key enabler of global climate action. Moving on to the connectivity or the relationship among these three, when we talk about the sustainable finance, green finance and climate finance, these three terms we very well use as far as the finance is concerned in sustainability and climate sector. So, what is the relationship and link? It is depicted here. So, sustainable development on the right hand side, we have put the broader concept in broader divisions as far as social, governance and economics are concerned. On the left hand side, we are taking the environmental wing. As far as the environmental wing or the sector is concerned, it can have climate change adaptation, mitigation and other environmental issues or related management activities. So, as far as the climate finance is concerned, it deals with both mitigation and climate change mitigation and adaptation, whereas green finance is concerned, it deals with both climate change adaptation and mitigation as well as other environmental related issues, whereas the sustainable finance deals with the environmental issues as well as the social, governance and economic sector. So, if we define the other way, sustainable finance is the broader umbrella that accommodates the green finance, which takes care of the environmental component, and within environmental component the climate finance takes care or more strictly deals with the climate change adaptation and mitigation related issues. Moving on to the history of climate finance, in 1997 we have the establishment of UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and that was signed in 1997, and we moved on to the Kyoto Protocol, where the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, has been introduced. So, as we go up, so in terms of the clean development mechanism, we had the Annex and Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries, and we entered into a commitment to reduce it in an average of 5.2% of the emission level. So, that was done in 1997 as far as the Kyoto Protocol is concerned. Moving on to the Copenhagen Accord in 2009. So, after this, when in Copenhagen the world leaders, the signatories to the Kyoto Protocol, they met and discussed that what are the advancement as far as the commitments have been done, or what is the where we are as far as the various commitments have been taken, has been made. So, for that in the Copenhagen Accord in 2009, in Copenhagen, the countries have met, the world leaders and the negotiators, they discussed, and for the first time they spelled out $100 billion per year in terms of climate finance goal. So, this was a pledge. This was pledge that we will bring out $100 billion, and particularly with means pledged with common but differentiated responsibility. So, common but differentiated responsibility, the CBDR, another terminology has come up. So, 2009 first time a kind of fund commitment goal has been came in terms of a pledge to the tune of $100 billion. Moving on to the next year, the GCF, Green Climate Fund, was established. So, Green Climate Fund was established in 2010, and then after another 7 years, the Paris Agreement period 2015 onwards. So, 2017 to 2020, we discussed lot of things with respect to retaining the temperature rise by 2 degree and must try to retain it by 1.5 degree by 2050, 2070, and all these different commitments have been discussed. So, so that means during that Paris Agreement, it was again reinforced. So, again the people have discussed with respect to the different aligned features as far as the climate goals with the CBDR, common but differentiated responsibility. So, in terms of a kind of capacity level discussion has come up as far as the funding is concerned in terms of climate finance. So, 2021 again a green fund. So, green fund in terms of environmental, social and government investment, okay, or governance investment has came up. So, rise of a green bond and ESG investing in 2021. So, this actually exploits the what you say issuance of green, social and sustainability bonds. Moving on to 2023, in Glasgow. In Glasgow, people took stock about the commitment, nationwide commitment to achieve the net zero. So, in that again this the financial thing, it was increased to 130 trillion USD. So, from 100 billion it moved up to 130 trillion USD committed in what you say to arrest or to realize the net zero commitment, right. So, moving on to 2024 and 2025, the climate risk disclosure became laws and global shift towards mandatory climate reporting has come up, and we moved on from a, so that means a kind of from Copenhagen Accord 2009, 100 billion USD commitment in terms of CBDR, mostly by developing countries to put, and then in Glasgow it went up to 130 trillion USD. So, this is a kind of history as far as the climate finance is concerned. So, climate finance refers to local, national or translational financial support from these various sources aimed at funding mitigation actions, that means reducing the net greenhouse gas emissions and or the adaptation actions, enhancing resilience to climate impacts. Moving on to the international sources of climate finance. As far as the international climate finance is concerned, so international cooperation enable accelerated low carbon investments and climate adaptation, flows mainly from Annex 2. Annex 2, that means developed countries, for the non Annex 1 countries, that means the developing countries. So, let us see in terms of this diagram or depiction in two dichotomy. The left one is public international sources and the right one is with respect to the private international sources. So, in terms of the public international sources, we have the MDB, multilateral development banks, we have the multilateral climate funds MCFs, we also have the bilateral agencies. Moving on to the right hand side, we have the foreign direct investment FDI, we have the commercial financial institutions and institutional investors in terms of foreign investment, and the CDM, clean development mechanism, which was originally discussed in the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. So, that the projects it projects in developing countries to generate the CR, certified emission reductions, that will enable financial transfer from the developed countries. So, and a kind of philanthropic, that means grants from international foundations and organizations, high flexibility, but limited in terms of financial scale. So, this is a kind of structure as far as the private international source and the public international source is concerned. So, the examples as far as the MDB, multilateral development bank is concerned, it is World Bank or ADB, Asian Development Bank, or EIB, that is European Investment Bank. Coming to the multilateral climate funds, examples are your GCF, Green Climate Fund, Green Enforcement Facility GEF. And as far as the third one, that means third one of the public international sources, bilateral agency is concerned, the examples could be USAID, JICA, Japanese Investment that CA, and the DFID, and also the FCDO. So, these are some of the organizations that work in terms of a bilateral agency. That means one is the donor and the other one is kind of a receiver. So, this is the international public and private financial complements that that domestic efforts in addressing the climate mitigation and adaptation. So, as far as the climate finance instruments are concerned, they are the financial mechanism used to mobilize and channel funds for climate mitigation in terms of that means reducing emission and climate adaptation, as we understand building resilience. So, climate finance is deployed through a diverse toolkit of financial instruments, each suitable or suited to different risk profiles, project stages and market context. So, that means understanding the instruments in terms of climate finance instruments, instrumental landscape is essential for structuring effective climate finance transactions. So, the categories, let us first talk about the first category, that is the green bonds. In terms of green bonds, the key features are fixed income instrument that proceeds strictly for the green projects, requires second party opinion SPO from the verifier. It also needs a kind of annual impact reporting is mandatory. So, we put it under greenium, that means low yield versus vanilla bond, some bond available in liquid markets. Eligible category, all renewable energy sector including solar, wind, energy efficiency sectors, clean transport including EVs and infrastructure, sustainable water management. So, example as far as this is concerned, the green bond is concerned, we have India sovereign green bond by Ministry of Finance. So, first it was issued in January 2023. So, India issued its first sovereign green bond in January to February 2023, and the eligible categories, as I mentioned, are the renewable energy sector in terms of solar and wind, also small hydropowers, the public transport as far as metro is concerned, green buildings, water and sanitation, pollution control and sustainable agriculture. So, these sectors are categories are eligible to apply or to be considered for the India sovereign green bond, which is available under Ministry of Finance since January 2023. Now, moving on to the next category, that is climate funds. So, large multilateral funds created to support developing countries in mitigation and adaptation. Major global funds such as Green Climate Fund GCF, Global Environment Facility GEF, Adaptation Fund AF, and Climate Investment Fund, that is CIF. The third category is the climate pricing, the carbon pricing instrument. So, market based mechanisms that put a price on carbon emission, or when we talk about carbon, as I mentioned earlier, also it talks about carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. So, carbon tax, government charge a tax per ton of CO2 equivalent emitted, such as in Sweden we have Sweden's carbon tax, which is equivalent to what you say €130 per ton of carbon dioxide you emit. As far as ET is concerned, emission trading system, companies buy or trade emission permits. So, for example, this European Union emission trading system, we have already a structured framework as far as European Union is concerned. Now, let us move on to the fourth category, that is regarded as the blended finance. So, blended finance is the strategic use of public or concessional capital, that means grants, concessional loans, guarantees first loss equity to reduce risk and improve returns for private investors. It thereby mobilizes the private capital for climate projects such as renewable energy, climate infrastructure, climate adaptation projects that would not otherwise attract the commercial investment. So, this is the main thing, that is the use of public and concessional capital to reduce the risk. It is the primary mechanism for bridging the climate finance gap, particularly in the developing countries. Now, the fifth category is the carbon market or the carbon finance. So, in terms of the carbon market, we know it puts a price on the greenhouse gas emission, because CO2 equivalent we say in terms of greenhouse gases, and that is how it creates a financial incentive to reduce that. So, it could be two types. One is a kind of compliance market, second is also second is the voluntary market. So, compliance carbon market, government regulated systems where companies must reduce or offset their greenhouse gas emissions to meet legally binding limits. So, firms that emit more than their allowed level must buy carbon allowances or credits, while those emitting less can sell their surplus, creating a regulated market for emissions. The major markets, for example, are EU ETS, China ETS, California CAP, and trade UK ETS. So, the trading systems kind of thing. As far as India is concerned, it is developing a carbon trading system scheme CCTS under Energy Conservation Act 2022. Now, let us move on to the next one is the VCM, that is voluntary carbon market, which allow companies or individual to purchase credit representing verified emission reductions or removals to offset their own emissions. So, credits come from projects such as renewable energy, forest conservation as RED is concerned, mangrove restoration, and cook stoves and other energy efficient projects. Moving on to the domestic sources. As far as the domestic sources of climate finance is concerned in India, so look at this, it also have two wings, public and private. So, the main source of climate finance can be broadly categorized into domestic and international streams originating from both public and the private actors. So, domestic climate finance, majority of the global climate finance is sourced domestically rather than cross border. So, public domestic sources in terms of government budgetary allocations, direct in terms of this direct spending by national and sub-national governments. Public sector in terms of means public sector understanding, we put it under PSU. So, state owned entities funding government schemes. As far as the NCF is concerned, this is financed through government budgets and cess collections, such as you see the National Clean Energy Fund NCF, National Adaptation Fund for Climate Change NAFCC. The fourth one is market based mechanism. So, this is a kind of regulatory scheme leveraging the private finance. So, in terms of perform, achieve and trade PAT and renewable purchase obligations, that is put under RPO. The fifth one is a kind of sovereign green bond. So, as far as sovereign green bond is concerned, the government issued bonds for green infrastructure. This is in terms of the public domestic sources. Let us move on the private. As far as the private is concerned, it can have four different wings or divisions. We can discuss it under commercial financial institutions and banks, corporations and project developers, non-banking financial companies called NBFCs, and household retail investors. So, the first one, as far as the commercial finance institution and banks is concerned, major provider of debt finance regulatory, mainly migration, this is SBI, the LIC and the EPFO, that is Employment Employment Provident Fund Organization. As far as the corporations and project developers are concerned, large private investment is coming through this. Now, the non-banking debt financing for renewable and small scale projects and households, you have residential, commercial and institutional investments coming in this. So, this is the arrangement as far as domestic public finance remains the dominant source of climate finance in India. So, domestic public finance is the dominant or the major source of climate finance in India. So, moving on to the next is who is involved as far as the climate finance is concerned. So, the flow mechanism is like this: multilateral sources, central government, NABARD, then it moves in terms of the line ministries and state or the district level projects. So, on the left hand side, let us look at the climate finance architecture. So, up to down you have the global sources. So, developed countries, particularly the multilateral development banks, the MDBs and the private sector, flows on to the multilateral and bilateral channels, that is the Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facility and the Adaptation Fund. At the next level means is the national level. So, it is a national and sub-national institutions. So, there we have the National Climate Fund, government or ministerial level or the state climate plans. At local level, so local stakeholders you have mostly in terms of projects, communities and business. So, you can see in terms of the arrow funding, and both ways it is going financing, and downside it is flow. And as far as the pathway of climate finance is concerned, multiple development banks, domestic financing, carbon markets and the bilateral assistance, all of them these lead towards the contribute to the climate finance. So, let us take a case study as far as India is concerned. So, India BCM project, so and the clean cook stove multiple states. India hosts hundreds of voluntary carbon market projects across various sectors including forestry, clean energy, cooking gas, clean cooking and many others. So, two of the most significant categories are REDD+. So, as we know, REDD stands for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So, forest remains silent here in terms of the abbreviation. So, reduction in emission from deforestation and degradation. So, this degradation is generally we are talking with respect to forest. So, these programs, and the second one is the clean cook stove distribution, both generating significant international carbon revenues. So, we have as an example as far as the Odisha REDD+ program is concerned, World Bank supported REDD+ programs in Odisha community forests, 15 million tons of carbon dioxide credits over 10 years. Forest communities receive 60% of carbon revenue as direct cash transfers. The clean cook stove credits, organizations like Nexus Carbon India, Clean Cook Stove have registered gold standard projects distributing 2+ million improved biomass cook stoves. Each stove generates about or approximately 1 ton of carbon dioxide per year as far as the credit is concerned. Now, moving on to the carbon revenue flows. India BCM projects generated approximately 150 to 200 million USD in terms of carbon revenue in 2023 as far as the report coming from ICAP and Forest Trends estimate. So, the community benefit, it is well designed, that means the voluntary carbon market based projects, they are very well designed in India to deliver cash income to tribal community, that means the forest dwellers, the women's self-help groups SSGs and forest dwellers. The tribal people are originally who are living within forest or adjoining to the forest. So, that means a direct poverty climate co-benefit is realized through this kind of mechanism, which is well proven in terms of this case study as far as our country is concerned. So, we have taken help of these references. So, for making these slides and this for our discussion. So, to conclude, climate finance is the critical enabler that turns climate ambition into action. It mobilizes resources from diverse public, private, domestic and international sources to support both mitigation and adaptation, while aligning finance flows with low carbon, climate resilient development as far as in compliance with the Paris Agreement. So, the key takeaways what we discuss in terms of domestic source dominant in India, international flows complement through MDB, GCF and carbon markets. Innovative instruments such as green bonds, blended finance, carbon markets and the redirection of fossil fuel capitals are essential to close the 4.3 trillion gap as far as the gap is concerned, as far as the global level is there. And effective architecture, public private partnership and common focused projects, for example, India's REDD+ and Cook Stoves deliver both climate and development co-benefits. So, this is what we started in terms of introducing to the carbon finance, and in next 4 lectures in this week we will talk more about all this in details. Thank you very much for listening to this course, this lecture. Thank you.